The US needs to show its moral stamina by being the prime representative of what was called the free world, the term that was used during the Cold War, but which has now become activized. Hi, I'm Markku, Wilenius, your traveling futurist. US needs to show its moral stamina by providing money and other assets to Ukraine. If US would not do that, that would be the sign for the Western allies also not to do that. So currently the US feels very much responsible for doing that. So that is one of the reasons why we have the situation where actually the United States has put more than 75 billion to the concrete aid and support to Ukraine, while other parties in the West, particularly European countries, yes, they have given some, but much less than the US. But the Biden's policy has actually worked very well, because as a result of that, the West, the Europe, which had such difficulties in the beginning to digest the completely new geopolitical situation, have been pushed also to extend their support and their arms and their aid to Ukraine. But without the US being the primary leader of this would probably have happened much slower pace as we now see. And even if this space that we have seen is all too slow to meet the demands of Ukraine. Of the total $75 billion aid to Ukraine, it is being divided into financial assistance, into weaponry, into the training, into the intelligence, and simply clean financial support. All these aspects of support have built up this quite significant package which comprises this 75 billion. Much of that money has flown into the training and into a build of more intelligence for Ukrainian armed and security forces to withstand the Russian attack. And there is a clear evidence and analysis to show that without this type of the support, Ukraine might not be able to defend themselves, and which means that the critical amount of the aid that has flown into from the United States have actually built the type of the capability for the Ukrainian to withstand and maybe later actually to attack back. But the real issue is here. This aid has been pivotal for Ukraine, and without it, we might have a completely different situation currently in the whole war. And what I mean by that is that there would be, let's say, half of the country maybe occupied by the Russian troops, because there was, in the beginning of war, a huge difference in terms of the resources from men to weapons to intelligence between these two countries. In fact, it was thought that Russian army is the second most powerful army after the United States Army. That was the general assumption. And that assumption was based on the amount of the money and resources that have flown into the Russian army, and based also on the fact that that is a large country with a lot of people, meaning a lot of human reserves for fighting. Now, even if the reality has proved different, it is quite clear now that Russia would have been doing a very different type of the progress when there had not been this Ukrainian defensive system being geared up by the support of the United States. Now we are in the situation where we can actually see that none of the goals that Putin was setting for this war have been achieved by the Russian army. None of that. And that is not because of the miracle has happened, and that is not because of Russian troops have been performing so badly. No. Let me be clear with this. Without upgrading the support, without all this training, without those additional weaponry, without all this direct financial support, none of that would have happened. And Ukrainian would be the very, very different position now as to defend their country and their freedom. So again, I like to emphasize this point that for the Ukrainians, American aid has been quintessential for their capacity to defend their country in this war of that Putin wanted to engender. But there is one more ramification to this, which is that when we are thinking about what is the type of the message this American aid is sending to any other dictators around the world that are pursuing their goals of expanding their powers, the message is clear. You cannot do that without consequences. At least it looks like that now, after more than 1 year of the fight. And that is because there is this, not just this moral resistance, but there is actually the resistance that comes from being able to support the country that has been occupied by the foreign forces. And this message is very strong and clear, and now it is up to continuation of that support, whether actually Ukraine can fight back and regain the control of all of its territories. And then we come back to if the American support will continue. Under Biden regime, it seems to be quite self-evident that this will happen. But if there is a regime change in the United States, if the conservatives get to the power, the situation might dramatically change. At the same time, my prediction about this war is that it will see a definite turn in the course of this year, perhaps before the summer even, where there is clearly so many signs now that Russian troops have been exhausted. The leadership of the country does not actually know what they should be doing, and that all builds up this waning power of the war machine that is working for the good of the Ukrainians. When it comes to the relationship between the United States and Russia, this is not the first time where there is really a low tide between those relationships. This has been there before, particularly in some of the critical years of the Cold War. But this time is obviously different, because what can happen in the future is that there might be a regime change taking place in Russia. In fact, there are a lot of indicators that the Russians start to get really, really tired about the war. And that would give an opportunity, maybe inside the Russia, for the liberal forces to take up their position and try to persuade the Russian public to see that this type of the policy that Putin and his cronies has now been leading for 20 years is nothing but the cul-de-sac, smashed to the wall in the end. And there has to be alternative to that. The interesting point is that if that change happen, the current American policies, which has been very tough against the current Russian regime, will reap the benefit of actually support that more liberal Russian political front to appear, and maybe changing the average Russians even to understand for the good of their country they need to be actually more interconnected to the West for the benefit of the Russia. And if this happens, then this support that Americans have now poured to the Ukraine will actually be the benefit for the Russian people. And this is not completely unlikely to happen. I would give some percentage, which is more than 10, even more than 20, for this to happen at some period of time between now and the next 3 years. Because from the systems perspective, and remember, I am a futurist and I love systems perspective. From the systems perspective, the current system of Russia is about to fall apart. Again, this is not the first time. The last time we saw it was 1991, when the Soviet Union sort of dismantled itself. Totally, just one day, there was no Soviet Union. But there were a lot of states that were re-identifying themselves from the ruins of the Soviet Union. And this is what we might be seeing now, because out of the old ashes comes something new. And that something new is never a continuation of the past. Because future time and again surprises us, shows us that the different option is possible. And it is our responsibility to keep open up these different alternatives. But the point here is too that Americans need to be seeing this, that these type of positive consequences might be borne out of this current support that they have done for the cause of Ukraine, of course, but also for the cause of America itself. Subscribe to my channel and see other related videos where you can learn more about the future.